Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. In today's episode we're going to be exploring the best NVMe HAT and storage options for the Raspberry Pi 5. After countless hours of testing and research, I'm excited to share my top recommendations with you and guide you through a full installation process. We'll also cover why our chosen NVMe HAT stands out from the rest, how it integrates seamlessly with the Raspberry Pi 5 and the performance benefits it offers over the standard micro SD card. We'll start by discussing the evolution of the storage on the Raspberry Pi and the advantages of the new PCIe port on the Pi 5. Then we'll move into benchmarking tests to compare boot times, read and write speeds, I/O performance and power consumption between the SD cards and the NVMe drive. I'll also highlight the different NVMe HATs available, their pros and cons, and walk you through installing the Pimoroni NVMe HAT, which is our top choice. As always, be sure to check out the description box below. You'll find a direct link to today's blog post where you can easily copy and paste any commands mentioned in this episode. Finally, I'll show you how to transfer your Raspberry Pi OS to an NVMe drive and share the results of our comprehensive tests. If you're new here, this video is part of a dedicated Raspberry Pi 5 series designed for all experience levels. Don't forget to like, subscribe and join our community Discord for more tech discussions. We've included links to all the recommended products mentioned in this episode, each of which has been thoroughly tested for compatibility with the Raspberry Pi 5. These are affiliate links, meaning they come at no extra cost to you, but they help support the channel with a small commission. A huge thank you to everyone who uses these links. Your support truly makes a difference. If you've been following along with our Raspberry Pi 5 series, you should already have a clean installation of a Raspberry Pi OS desktop on your SD card and your Raspberry Pi 5 fully connected and ready for first boot. This episode will start from that setup, so ensure your setup matches or refer to our earlier episodes to get everything in place. Now we have all that out of the way, let's get into today's episode. Before we dive into the NVMe storage on the Raspberry Pi 5, let's look at how storage has evolved across Raspberry Pi models. For years, SD cards were the main storage for Raspberry Pi, offering an affordable and simple solution that was ideal for lightweight applications, education and hobby projects. Despite being convenient, SD cards have some major limitations. First, they are relatively slow, which means longer boot times and slower data access, especially noticeable in tasks involving large files or complex applications. SD cards also tend to degrade over time. Their memory cells wear out with frequent read and write cycles, which can lead to data corruption. This is a common problem in setups that run continuously or log data frequently, like IoT devices and media servers. Capacity was another constraint. While larger SD cards are available today, they are more costly per gigabyte and still fall short of the NVMe capabilities. So SD cards have been essential but also limiting for the Raspberry Pi users. Now that we understand the limitations of the SD card storage, let's talk about one of the most exciting upgrades on the Raspberry Pi 5, the PCIe port. This port introduces a new level of functionality that opens up possibilities beyond what previous Raspberry Pi models could offer. The addition of a PCIe port on the Raspberry Pi 5 is a game changer for data transfers and storage capabilities. Unlike previous models that relied solely on SD cards, this port enables direct high-speed connections with devices like NVMe storage. Essentially, PCIe provides a dedicated pathway for data, bypassing the bottlenecks we saw with SD cards and USB storage. PCIe on the Raspberry Pi 5 runs at PCIe 2.0 x 1 speeds, which offers data transfer rates of around 500 megabytes per second. While this isn't as fast as some desktop PCIe connections, it's a huge leap from the speeds we're used to with the SD cards. Another major benefit is the flexibility the PCIe port brings. It's not just for storage, you can connect a variety of compatible devices, from network adapters to additional USB hubs. However, in this episode, we're focused on the big advantages of using an NVMe storage to boost both speed and capacity. In short, the PCIe port on the Raspberry Pi 5 unlocks performance and storage capabilities that we could only dream of in previous models. This upgrade will make the Pi much more versatile, especially in projects where data speed and reliability are key. Now let's move on to our initial benchmarking tests with the SD card to set a baseline, so we can later see how much the NVMe storage improves performance. First up, we'll measure the SD card boot time. We're going to use the systemd analyze command to check how long the system takes to boot. We will do this straight after a clean boot. This will give us an overview of the total boot time, splitting it into kernel and user space initialization. Running this command shows us how quickly the Raspberry Pi is able to get up and running using the micro SD card. And finally, we'll run a comprehensive test using the Pi benchmark script. This will execute multiple tests, providing a full benchmark overview. This script is a great way to round off our benchmark tests, and we can even compare our results with others on the pibenchmarks.com website. Alright, now that we've tested the baseline performance of the SD card, let's dive into one of the most important choices you'll make when upgrading the Raspberry Pi 5, selecting the right NVMe HAT. There are a few great options out there, so let's take a look at 3 popular choices and compare their pros and cons. But before we get into the specifics, it's important to understand how HAT compatibility can affect your Raspberry Pi setup. Some HATs can block access to important ports like the GPIO pins, or may not fit properly with certain cases. This can limit your ability to expand your Pi's functionality or protect it with a case. So choosing the right HAT is crucial, especially if you plan to use your Pi for additional projects in the future. First up, we have the official Raspberry Pi M.2 HAT Plus. This HAT is designed to provide basic NVMe support and is compatible with the 2230 and the 2242 sized NVMe drives. It connects directly to the Raspberry Pi 5's PCIe interface, which runs at PCIe 2.0 speeds, giving it a max transfer rate of 500 megabytes per second. In summary, while the official Raspberry Pi M.2 HAT Plus does provide some limited GPIO connectivity, it is not directly accessible to the full range of GPIO pins on the Raspberry Pi. To fully access the GPIO pins, you would need to add pass-through pins to the HAT Plus, which may require additional hardware and setup. So if full GPIO access is a priority, this may not be the most convenient option. Additionally, if you're wanting to follow along with our Raspberry Pi 5 series, we will be covering projects that will utilize the GPIO pins, so you would want to avoid any HATs that are blocking them. Overall, this HAT is budget friendly at just £11.50, which is $12 to $14, making it a great choice for those looking for an affordable NVMe solution. But keep in mind the limitations regarding GPIO access and case compatibility, especially if you plan to expand your Raspberry Pi's capabilities or enclose it in a case. Next up, we have the Pimoroni NVMe Base, which is compatible with a wider range of NVMe drive sizes from 2230 up to 2280. This HAT mounts neatly under the Raspberry Pi, making it a great choice if you want a compact setup. One of the best features of the Pimoroni NVMe Base is that it is designed to maintain GPIO access, so you won't have to sacrifice expansion options for your storage upgrade. Since the Pimoroni NVMe Base installs underneath the Raspberry Pi 5, it leaves the top of the Pi free, meaning you can add other HATs on top if you want to expand your setup even further. This is a major advantage over HATs which mount on top and make additional HAT compatibility difficult. The Pimoroni NVMe Base is an excellent choice for combining flexibility and performance. By preserving GPIO access is ideal for projects involving electronics and interfacing, topics we'll be exploring in future episodes. Additionally, Pimoroni has announced that a compatible case for the NVMe HAT is in development, though as of recording this episode, a release date has not been provided. For now, we will be focusing on installing the NVMe drive on a bare Raspberry Pi 5. Also, just to add, the NVMe Base follows the new PIP design guidelines provided by Raspberry Pi, ensuring that it will be easy to use and it will be supported long term by updates to the Raspberry Pi OS. Finally, there is the GeeekPi family of NVMe HATs, which offers various models that support different drive sizes and allow GPIO access in some cases, which are all compatible with the GeeekPi Metal Case for a convenient all-in-one solution. Choosing one of these GeeekPi models with GPIO access provides flexibility for expansion while fitting within the GeeekPi Metal Case. Depending on your location, availability for these models may vary, making them harder to source compared to more widely available options. In addition to the previously discussed NVMe HATs, 2 noticeable all-in-one cases have emerged that integrate NVMe support for the Raspberry Pi 5. The first being the Argon Neo 5 M.2 NVMe PCIe case for the Raspberry Pi 5, and the second being the Argon 1 version 3 M.2 NVMe Raspberry Pi 5 case. I will leave a link in the description box below if you want to pick up either of these cases. So after comparing these options, I've decided to go with the Pimoroni NVMe Base for the series. Its flexibility, GPIO pin access, compatibility with a wide range of NVMe drives, and the ability to add additional HATs on top make it the best choice for our setup. Later on, I will be installing this HAT and showcasing its performance so we can see exactly how it measures up. Now that we've explored the available NVMe HATs for the Raspberry Pi 5, let's focus on selecting the appropriate NVMe storage. Choosing the right drive is crucial for optimal performance and compatibility. When selecting an NVMe drive, consider both the form factor and the keying. The Pimoroni NVMe Base supports M.2 NVMe SSDs with an M key, accommodating sizes from 2230 to 2280. This flexibility allows you to choose a drive that fits your storage needs and physical space constraints. M.2 form factors are denoted by 4 digits. The first 2 indicate the width, typically 22mm, and the last 2 represents the length. For instance, the 2280 drive is 22mm wide and 80mm long, ensuring the chosen drive matches one of the supported sizes. 2230, 2242, 2260 or 2280 is essential for proper installation. Beyond the physical dimensions, performance is a key consideration. The Raspberry Pi 5 operates at PCIe 2.0x1 speeds with a maximum throughput of approximately 500 megabytes a second. While many NVMe drives are designed for higher speeds, they will operate at the Pi's maximum capability. Therefore, investing in a high-end NVMe drive may not yield significant performance gains over a mid-range options in the setup. Pimoroni has tested the NVMe Base with several M.2 NVMe drives, confirming compatibility. As you can see from this list here, the list is extensive. They are all drives that have been tested. I have chosen to go with the NetAC NV3500GB NVMe SSD. We have chosen to go with this drive as it is listed on the drive compatibility list on the Pimoroni website, and it should work well with the Pimoroni NVMe HAT. This drive comes in various sizes, but for our needs, 500GB will be perfect. Now that we've selected our NVMe drive and the Pimoroni NVMe Base, let's walk through the installation process. We will be following the official guide from Pimoroni on their website. The link is in the description box below if you want to follow along with that. So now we've got everything ready to install the NVMe Base on the Raspberry Pi 5. We have the NetAC M.2 drive. We have the Pimoroni NVMe Base, and we're going to be opening this up and assembling it. And of course, we've got our Raspberry Pi 5. So what we're going to do first is we're going to open up the NVMe Base packet, and I'll show you what we get with this. So it just opens like so, and then we can slide out the base, and of course it comes with the screws and everything else.
A few moments later.
So before we start assembling the NVMe Base, we need to make sure that we have all the correct components. So we have the NVMe Base, we have the ribbon cable, we have some rubber feet, we have 4 long screws, we have 8 shorter screws, we have 1 sort of medium screw between these 2 sizes, we have 2 bolts, and we have 4 standoffs. Now these 3 here are all spare, so we can put them to one side. So the first things first, we're going to pick up the Raspberry Pi, and if you have an SD card in there, we're going to take the SD card out so it doesn't get in the way of putting the NVMe Base in. Put that to one side. So there is 2 methods for installing this NVMe Base. If you have a HAT, you can install this NVMe Base with the ability to add the HAT on afterwards on top, but you will need the extra standoffs for the HAT. Because we haven't got a HAT and we're not putting one in at this time, I'm going to install this with the non-HAT version. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to lift up the base and we're going to put in the 4 smaller screws. We're going to place one in here, and we're going to use the standoffs here. And we're going to do the same for the other 3. You just want to make sure that when you're assembling this, that you're not touching any of the components on the chipboards. You don't want to short it out in any way, so just be careful of that. And then we've got the final one. You just want to put them finger tight, don't go too mad, and then that's that installed. The next thing we want to do is we want to use the longer screw. So this is the medium screw, sorry, and that goes in the, depending on which NVMe drive you've got, I've got a 2280 size. There's various sizes, 2230, 2242, 2260 and 2280. So I'm going to put my pin in the 2280 because that corresponds to the size of my NVMe drive, and then I'm going to use one of the bolts and I'm going to screw that down. Again, this just has to be finger tight. And there you go. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the NVMe drive. So again, be careful how you handle it. Don't touch any components if there is any on it. Mine's covered up, so that's nice and handy. We're going to go in at an angle here. Make sure that your pins match up. This is an M key, so make sure you have an M key NVMe and that the pins match up. So we go in at a slight angle. We push it so that all the gold pins disappear, and then we push it down, and your pin here should fall on your standoff point here. That should correspond with the correct slot. So then you just got to screw it into that. So we're using the second bolt. And you just want to make sure, this can be a bit fiddly. You just want to make sure that you're just doing it finger tight again. There you are. And you see it's on. And you should know that it's on correctly because this doesn't move when you tap it there. So you can see that it's securely in there. So the next step is to insert the ribbon cable. Both of these ends are two different sizes. The smaller one goes into the Raspberry Pi 5, and you can see just there it's labeled. It says Raspberry Pi 5, and this one is the PCIe add-on. So this goes into the Pimoroni NVMe case. So we're going to pick up the NVMe base next, and there's like a clip on the PCIe port here. This clip actually clips upwards, and we want to make sure that it's 90, just a little bit over 90 degrees. You can see it goes back, and you want it to be fully back. That's 90, so it's a bit further than 90 there, so that we can fit the ribbon cable in there. And the ribbon cable should go underneath it. You should see it slot underneath. So I'm going to get the ribbon cable here, and we're going to do it this way, so that the dark side's facing up. And then if you watch here, when we put it in, obviously make sure that you're using the correct side. And you should see it go behind the pins. There you go. So it slightly sits in. And that's it, nicely secure. You can feel that that's securely in there now. And then you push the clip back down. Obviously, make sure with these clips that you're being careful with them because they are very delicate. Especially on the Pi 5, which I'll show you in a minute. That one can easily lift off, and you don't want to be getting in that position because then you won't be able to use the clips. So you want to make sure that this clip here is straight. Now looking at this, this is slightly off this side. I'm not quite happy with how that's sat. So I'm going to use my pliers. And I'm going to pop that up again. And make sure that's down that side. Yeah, that looks better now. So you can see that this black cable underneath is straight. So you know that that's in correctly. And there should be about a 1mm gap there between the ending of the black, like sort of the dark blue line behind it. But that's in correctly now. So now we're going to get the Raspberry Pi 5. Again, be careful how you handle the Raspberry Pi 5. You don't want to be touching anything, any of the components underneath. You don't want to be shorting the PCB board. So be very careful how you're handling it. Now we've got this clip that we've got to lift upwards. So I'm going to do it very gently using my nail. Make sure that it's fully up. Okay, so that's it fully up there, you can see. Again, be careful you don't put it too much because that will just come off that clip. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go this way so that the NVMe base is facing the Raspberry Pi. And we're going to go in directly 90 degrees down. And I can use my pliers to help ease it in. So what we've got to do is make sure that it's going in correctly. And that actually went in really nicely the first time. You don't want to put too much pressure on that cable because you don't want the cable to bend. So be careful when you're doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push down on that side. And I'm going to make sure that that clip is fully down. Again, when you push one side, the other side lifts. So make sure you're pushing in the middle as well. There you go. So now as you can see that's not in correctly. because you can see the gold pins are slightly raised one side, so that's actually not right. So we want to sort that out now. So we can use the pliers. In fact, I'll use my nail. Again, be very careful. This can be quite fiddly. It's just trial and error. You're just gonna have to keep checking back. There you go. Make sure you fully lift it up again. Okay, let's try again. I'm gonna get my pliers. I'm gonna put some very light pressure to the cable to try and push it down. Okay, I think that's in now. And I'm going to push down on the middle of this cable now. On the middle of the clip. So look at that now. That looks much better. Make sure these clips are fully down because they do lift. They do like to lift up. I don't want that. There you go. You can see the gold pins. You can just see sort of again 1mm of the gold pins. That's installed. That is installed correctly. That is what we want. And then, as you can see, it goes around there. So we're just going to leave that like that for now. Now what we're going to do, we're going to turn it around the other way. And the standoffs now need to link up with these holes on the Raspberry Pi. As you can see, we've got 4 here. And we're going to use these shorter screws here. And we're going to pop one in. And again, you're going to need the screwdriver for this section here. And then we're going to screw these in. So now we're going to screw these in. And they just screw straight into the standoffs. That's one. That's 2. Again, you don't want to do these too tight. You don't want to put any pressure on the Raspberry Pi itself. And then the final screw there. This one's a bit fiddly here because it's right in between the GPIO pins and the fan connector. And there you go. And there you are. And the last thing to do now is just to put the plastic feet on. Put them in each 4 corner. So that's 1 there. 2. 3. And 4. Okay, just like so, and as you can see now it sits quite flush with the ground. So now we can install the SD card back into it. This is the 64GB SanDisk Ultra. And it's got a Raspberry Pi installed on there. If you watch our previous episode, you can learn how to do that. And it needs to go in this way. And it just slots in next to that ribbon cable here. And we can push that in. So you don't want to put too much force on it. It's not quite in. There you go. And it just pushes in like so. So you should be in that much to make sure that it's in correctly. So there should be a couple of millimeters there spare on that side. Okay. So now we've connected the SD card. We're going to boot back into the Raspberry Pi OS, which is installed on the SD card. We're then going to install Raspberry Pi OS onto the NVMe drive. And then we're going to do some configurations to make sure that we can run the Gen 3 speeds on there if we want to. We're going to do some testing on that, test the Gen 2 and the Gen 3. And we're also going to change the boot process to make sure that we boot from the NVMe drive. So I'll see you over there in a minute. Now that we've successfully installed the Pimoroni NVMe Base and connected our NVMe drive, it's time to take the next step, moving Raspberry Pi OS from the SD card to the NVMe drive. Okay, so we're back on the desktop now. Before we install the operating system onto the NVMe drive, we need to do a few updates. The first one we're going to run is sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade. And we're going to use the Y flag to skip any prompts. So my Raspberry Pi is up to date. Now this process should update the EEPROM, which is the firmware of the Raspberry Pi. However, we're just going to manually check to make sure that the latest firmware is installed on a Raspberry Pi. This will just enable us to make sure that we've got all the support for the new NVMe technologies and that they're all installed ready to be used. So we're going to run sudo rpi -EEPROM, that's EEPROM -update, and we're going to enter that. Now that tells us our firmware version. So as of recording, that is the latest firmware, and you can see that my Raspberry Pi is up to date. Yours should be up to date as well, but if it's not, what you can do is you can go into the Raspberry config, and then from here you can go down to advanced options, and then you can go down to bootloader version, and then finally you can choose E1, which is the latest, and then press enter. Select no here if you want the latest bootloader, and then press enter, and then that should update your Raspberry Pi. Okay, so now that we know that we're on the latest firmware, we need to check that the NVMe drive is being read by the Raspberry Pi. To do this, we run the command ls, and then it's dev / and then NVMe 0. So once you run that command, if you get the same response here that I've got, which is / dev / NVMe 0, that means that the NVMe drive is being detected correctly. If you get an error here, which most likely will say cannot access, and then it'll say no such file or directory, what you can do is make sure that your installation is correctly, that you followed the right steps in our tutorial. What it most likely will be the ribbon cables not seated correctly. Just make sure, go over it again and make sure that they are pushed fully into the PCIe ports on both sides, on the HAT and the Raspberry Pi, and that should fix that error and it should show up. If it still doesn't work after that, you may have a faulty ribbon cable and you might want to reach out to Pimoroni and get a replacement for that. So installing the Raspberry Pi OS onto the NVMe can be achieved in several ways. You can do it via the desktop here, which is what we're going to do, using the Raspberry Pi Imager. There is also available the network install, which means you can do it over a Pixie boot, or you can clone the micro SD card using other methods. But in this episode, we are just going to stick to the Raspberry Pi OS Imager, and I'll show you how to run that now. So from the desktop, we're going to click on the Raspberry Pi menu, and we're going to go down to accessories, and then we're going to go to Raspberry Pi Imager. And then under choose device, just like we did with the SD card, we're going to select Raspberry Pi 5. We're going to choose our operating system, which is going to be the full desktop version. And then under choose storage, you should now see your NVMe drive appear here. So we're going to click on the NVMe drive. We're going to click next. And then you can edit all the settings. Now this is going to be a clean install. So the installation that we've done on the SD card will be non and void. So any settings that you've set up on that, you will want to repeat here to make sure that this has the same settings. So we're going to go to edit settings here. And I'm going to leave the host name as Raspberry Pi. If you leave it deselected, then it's going to use the default, which is raspberrypi.local. I'm going to set my username and then my password. And I'm not going to configure the wireless LAN because we are connected over Ethernet. And time is set to GB London. So that is the locale settings that are default. So I'm going to say save and just keep the defaults. And then from here, and then I'm going to click services. And I'm going to make sure enable SSH is on because I'm going to use SSH in later episodes. I would recommend turning SSH on. This means that you can connect to it over the network. And under options, again, we're just going to disable telemetry by clicking the box. So make sure you deselect that. I'm going to click save. And from here, that's it. I'm going to click yes. And then obviously any data will be destroyed on the NVMe drive if you click yes now and proceed. And then it's going to ask for our password. Now this process is going to do the same as before. It's going to write the operating system to the NVMe drive, and then it's going to verify it. And I'll skip this part here and we'll tune in at the end when it's all completed. So it has prompted me to put in my password again, which I'm going to do. And then click authenticate. So now that it has successfully finished, I'm going to click continue. And we can now move on to setting the boot process to the NVMe drive. So I'm going to cross out of here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to run a terminal. We're going to set the Raspberry Pi to boot from the NVMe SSD. We're going to go into the Raspberry config again. Sudo Raspberry config. And then from here we're going to go down to advanced options. And then go down to boot order this time. And then from here we're going to select NVMe USB boot from NVMe before trying USB and then SD card. So as it says from here, it's going to try and boot to the NVMe first, and then afterwards it's going to boot to any other devices that you have attached, which could be a USB drive or the SD card. So we're going to select that. And then it just confirms there that that's now set as our default boot device. Press OK. And then when you're finished, we're just going to click finish, and then we will reboot our Pi. So after a few boot cycles, we're now back on our Raspberry Pi desktop, booted into our NVMe drive. You may see that there's a couple of drives mounted here, which you might not want displayed on your desktop. So you can get rid of that easily by right clicking the desktop, click desktop preferences, and just untick external disks. That will get rid of that. Now that we have the NVMe installed and the Raspberry Pi 5 booting from it, we can run some follow-up tests. I will not bore you by going over the tests. I will just display the results for you and explain what they mean. There is also an experimental setting that we can try, which enables Gen 3 speeds on the NVMe drive and the PCIe port. I'm going to try that, but it is experimental. I wouldn't recommend setting this and using it in a production environment, even though I have checked online and many people have set the Gen 3 setting and have had no problems. So I'm going to do a final test, testing the Gen 3 speeds to the Gen 2 speeds, and that will give us our benchmark test across the board.
A few moments later.
We're now going to enable the experimental Gen 3 speeds, and we're going to compare them to the PCIe Gen 2 speeds. So we're going to open up a terminal. And the command we have to run is sudo nano boot firmware, and it's config.txt. And then what we need to do now is we need to add the following line. Here we go. So just under the all here, we're going to add dt param equals PCIe x1 underscore gen equals 3. So now all you've got to do now is press Control and X, and then press Y to say yes, and then enter to exit. Now that's saved to the nano file. You can check it by going back in and pop them down the bottom, and you can see that it is still there. So Control X. So now you want to reboot your Raspberry Pi. So we're now going to look at the results of our benchmark tests. We are going to look at the average boot times first. For all our benchmark tests, we ran 3 tests consecutively, then we averaged out the results. So as you can see, the micro SD card on average boots at 11.83 seconds, the NVMe Gen 2 was 10.99 seconds, and the NVMe Gen 3 was 10.92 seconds. So I was a little surprised by these boot times. I thought we would see a bit more of a speed gain using the NVMe drive. However, I would add that it's still early days for the Raspberry Pi 5 development, and using NVMe HAT drives, that we may see improved speeds with future operating system updates. So a 1 second gain in boot times is not a significant performance boost, but it's still faster than the micro SD card. Next, we're going to compare the read and write speeds. As you can see from the graph, the NVMe read and write speeds have significant improvements over the micro SD card. The Gen 3 setting is showing a marginal improvement over the Gen 2. It would just be interesting to see if this comes at a cost to stability, as this feature is experimental. Time will tell. I will let you know my findings in a future episode. Finally, I will give you the full results from our test and give you the benchmark scores. In conclusion, it is clear that using an NVMe drive is an impressive upgrade that yields substantial performance gains over the micro SD card, not only for speed but for reliability, stability and data integrity. So that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it. All the resources for today's episode can be found on our website at addicted2tech.net. You can also find the links in the description box below for all of my recommended products from the series. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you're notified of future uploads. Just before you go, I'd like to remind you to pop over to our Addicted to Tech community Discord server. You'll find a joint link in the description box below. This server has replaced our old forum and now serves as a space for you to get support, suggest content ideas and connect with other like-minded tech enthusiasts. I have lots planned for the community Discord channel, so pop over and introduce yourself. So as always, all this leaves for me to say now is thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one.